Okay, so we're going to be creating a React to-do app. So first thing that we're going to do is let's go ahead and open up the terminal. We're going to run npx create React app to-do list. Let's go ahead and wait for npx to finish this. Okay, so now that we have the React app installed, let's go ahead and open up app.js. Perfect. So let's go into the directory and let's get this running. npm run start. Taking a second to load. Okay, there we go. So now if we go into Chrome, we type localhost 3000. Okay, cool. So now React app is running. So let's go ahead and move out some of this boilerplate code. Let's get rid of all of this. Okay, nice. So now for the to-do list, we're going to need a couple of components to go in here. We're going to need the input component so that we can actually put text in to create the to-do list. We're going to need the to-do list items themselves, and then we're going to need some buttons to add to-do list items and buttons to remove them. So let's go ahead and start with, first let's get a header in here. So, all right. Add that header. I'm going to change around some of the CSS real quick so that I can get rid of this header element. I'm going to change the CSS and app.header or dash header and put it into just app. We can totally get rid of this CSS class. And I can get rid of this. I'm going to go ahead and put in an H1 tag for the header. H1 to-do list. Nice. Okay. I want the header to be at the beginning, so let's edit this. We'll put justify content start. Okay, perfect. Cool. And we're also going to want to use Bootstrap for this. So let's go ahead and download React Bootstrap. So React Bootstrap, get started. Okay, so we're going to run this npm command. So open the terminal back up. Sudo best. And we're going to wait for that to download. Okay, dope. So now we have to include the actual CSS itself, so that we'll have Bootstrap in our app, and we're going to put that inside of app.js. So if we come back here, our Bootstraps should be in here. So now let's create the first component. So we're going to do a components folder, components. And we're going to call it to-do list input. To-do list input. Create the file to-do list input.js. We're going to import React. Cool. We're going to import Bootstrap later. And then we're going to create the actual component itself. Return nothing for now, and then export the component. Oops, export default. There we go. So for the input, if we take a look at React Bootstrap, let's see what their input component is. So if we go to components, doesn't look like they have just a normal input component. So if we check out forms, okay, there we go. So it's going to be a form component. All right, cool. So let's do import form from React Bootstrap / form, and create the form component here. Form dot control. So form dot control, and let's give it a placeholder of to do item. And let's see what we get. Yeah, we have to import it first into app.js. Components, import to-do list input from components, to-do list, and then to-do list. Okay, so let's put it here, to-do list input. Nice, okay, so it's looking good. So now we're also going to want to put a button on the end of it, because that's what's going to actually add the to-do list item itself once we click on it. So let's do a button from React Bootstrap. Import button from React Bootstrap / button. And let's go button. We'll say create item. And we'll want these, we want to put our button right next to our input component. So let's add a Bootstrap class here. Class name is inline group. Nope. What is that? What's it called? Yeah, okay, so it looks like it's called input group. That's what it is, not inline group. Input group. Okay, cool, perfect. So let's go ahead and change the width of this component. 75%. Okay, nice. So now we're going to need another component that's going to list our actual to-do items. Is the to-do items list, and then create the actual component items list. Import React const list equals props. I'm going to return nothing for right now, and then export default to-do items list. So now let's take a look at what the list component looks like for React Bootstrap. Okay, so React Bootstrap list. Okay, so it's going to be a list group. So let's import list group. Import list group from React Bootstrap. We're going to return it right here. List group. And we're going to say, just as a test item, list group dot item. It's going to be called item 1. Let's go ahead and import this into app.js. To-do list, to-do items list from components, to-do items list, to-do items list, there we go. To-do items list. All right, let's see what that looks like. Forgot the end right here. List group. There we go. And the text needs to be a different color because it's white right now. So let's do class name text primary. Oops. Yeah, there we go. Okay, cool. So we're going to change the width of this component to match the input. Add some margin to the top of it. Perfect. Okay, so we have the basics. We have our list item right here. Now we need to, so we have our create button, we have our input button, but we also need our remove button right here. So let's go ahead and add that in here. So we can say we're going to import another button from React Bootstrap button. Let's add a button in here that will remove. I want to see how we style the button. We're going to go ahead and make it red. So let's see how they do that in React Bootstrap. Variant warning. Okay. So let's do variant equals warning. See how that renders. Nice. How about danger? Nice, like it. Okay, so let's use flexbox to put these on the two opposite sides. So I'm going to say class name equals deflex, and we're going to say justify content between. Nope, wrong. Around. Oh wait, wrong one. That's why I'm putting it on the button. Need to put this on the list item. There we go. So between. Okay, cool. So we've got our list item, we've got our remove button, we've got our input, and we have our create item button. So now we need to make this component reusable through the props. So let's go ahead and say we're going to use the structured props here, and we're going to make this, what do we want to call our props? To do items. And so we're going to say in here, put the curly brackets, and we're going to map for each to do item, we're going to return this component. So let's say to do items dot map item, and it's going to return this right here. And it's added the parentheses for us right here in VS Code. And we're going to want, instead of item 1, this can say item dot name. And we'll want to add a key to keep track of it helps React to keep track of the order of iterable items when they get mapped to the UI. So we're going to give it an ID. So item.id. Right, and so we have this undefined error now because we're not actually passing anything into our props here. So let's go ahead and create the state so that we can pass items in there. So we're going to use React hooks, and we're going to destructure them from React itself. So we're going to say use state, use effect. We're going to say const items, set items. So with React hooks, this just lets you use or hook into functionality that normally comes from React class components inside of a functional component. And so with this, we have our items state object, and we have our function that's going to let us set the state for that. So in order to use this, let's say to do items list, and what do we call it? To do items. So we're going to say to do items equals items. And we're going to initialize the state to an empty array. There we go, so that it's not breaking anything. Now what we want to do is every time for this component, when we enter to do item, so like item 1, and then we click on create item, we're going to want it to create an actual to do items component. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and get a state ready for this. So if we go back into this component, we can take the props here again, and we can say on change and value. We're going to pass those in to the form control. It's going to be on change equals on change, the value equals value. And then we're going to need an on click handler as well. So on click, we can say on click equals on click. There we go. Okay, cool. All right. So now to set those, so let's say handle on change, and we're going to say E, and what we're going to do also need to create a state actually for the input itself. So let's say to do input set to do input. We can initialize it to nothing. We'll pass in on change equals set handle on change, and what that's going to do is here is where we're actually going to set what gets input into this component into the state. So let's do set to do input. That's going to be equal to e dot target dot value. Then we can pass in the actual state item itself. Value is going to be equal to do input. So let's test that out. Nice, so far so good. Okay, so this is setting the state for us. Yep, state is getting passed in. Everything is working nicely how we need it to, but we still need the create item portion. So let's do a const handle create item click. And it needs to do two things. So when we click on this button right here, it needs to create our new to-do list item, but it also needs to get rid of the text that's going to be in the input already so that we can create another to-do list item. So to handle both of those things, let's do create to-do item. And we're going to say set items. Take the previous items that might already be in the array. We're going to return items. We're going to create a new item with a name of the current to-do input. And then we're going to set the to-do input back to nothing, how it was before. Let's save this and refresh. Okay, so this should create our item like how we wanted to. Item 1. No, we have a problem. Oh yes, we're not passing in the actual handler yet. On click is handle create reset input. Okay, so now let's try this. Item 1 create item. Okay, perfect. Except we're not resetting our input like how we want. But item 1, item 2, let's put a string in there. Perhaps it needs an input of some kind. Item 1. There we go. Okay, so now it's resetting the input like how we want it to. So we'll go ahead and actually initialize it that way too. So item 1, item 2, item 3. Okay, cool. All right. So for this, now we need to create the functionality to remove our to-do list items. So let's go ahead and say const remove items equals remove item. Yeah, okay. And for this, if you'll remember, in the to-do list here, I set the key to the item ID. Typically, you'll have some kind of function that you can use to generate a unique ID for each item. It's typically not recommended that you use the index to create a different ID for each item. But for this, we're going to go ahead, just to simplify it, we're going to use the to-do input as the ID as well as the name. To-do input. And that's just going to work for our scenario because we can create different names for each of the to-do items, but realize that if you were to actually do this, ideally you want your ID, each of them to be different because they're a unique identifying key for each of your mapped items. Okay, so we're going to say removed item. So in order to remove an item, we need to know which item it is that we click on. And so it would help us to store the ID on here as well. So let's go ahead and say data dot item ID. I'm going to set that equal to item.id, just so that when we click on this remove button, we have a reference to which item ID it is that we're actually clicking on. And we're going to say Okay, so in order to remove the item, first we need to retrieve this data ID that we just put on that one. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and say, to retrieve it, it's an attribute. So let's do E. So it's a const item ID equals E dot current target dot get attribute data dash item ID. And we're going to console log that real quick, item ID, just to make sure that it's working. And we're also going to pass that in as a prop. Remove item. We're going to say the on click for this element is going to be remove item. And so let's pass that in app.js. Remove item equals remove item. Alright, so let's open up the inspector and see what we get. And that's, oops, not what I meant to do. That's, yeah, dock this on the bottom. Okay, so if I open up the console and I say item 1, I create my item and then I click this. Awesome. Okay, so you see that we're getting the item ID from this event.currentTarget.get attribute data-item ID. So we know that that's working fine. So now we can go ahead and use that to actually remove the item from our state. So we can get rid of this. And let's say, let's go ahead and set the state for items. And we're going to say set items and make it a function to get the previous items already in state. Items, and we're going to return items.filter item, and we want to return, let's say if the item ID does not equal item ID, then we'll keep that item in there, but otherwise, if the item ID does not equal this right here, meaning that it's not one that we clicked on, then it's going to remain in the to-do list, the to-do items list. But if it does match it, then that means that it's the to-do list item that we clicked on, and so it's going to be removed from state and thus removed from the UI. So let's give this a try. Item 1, item 2, boom. So let's try it by removing, let's remove the second one. Awesome, okay, so you see it gets removed from state. It's no longer there. Item 1, item 2, item 3. Awesome. Okay, so it's adding and removing items from state with create items and the remove button. This is resetting properly, and so everything is working how we need it. So I'll leave a link down in the description for the code on GitHub if you want to mess with it, play around with it a little bit. Leave some comments down below and everything, but yeah, that's about it.